Hi girls, this is topic 3, section 5, cost of production. All right, so a little warm up. You're making sandwiches for a picnic. You think of your factor resources, right? So you have physical capital, that's the knife, you're the labor, and then your inputs would be your sandwiches, sandwich filling, your turkey, chicken, roast beef, whatever the case may be. So how many sandwiches should you make, right? Well, what kind of questions did you have to answer before you helped make a good educated decision? Okay. If I asked you in class, I hope that someone will raise their hand and say, well, how many people are going to be at the picnic, right? Are 5 sandwiches enough? Or if you have a picnic of 100 people, then you probably need 100, right? So this is just to start to get you to think that, businesses think about the cost of making one more unit of a good when deciding how to maximize profits. If you went to the supermarket today and bought materials to make 100 sandwiches and only 10 people showed up, can you see how much of a waste of money that would be? You'd have all these leftover sandwiches that would eventually spoil. So in today's lesson, we're going to see how businesses try to decide the numbers, how many to make, when do you make one more, right? And then, also how many workers do you hire? If we talked about it before in class, if you have the same amount of staff at your restaurant on Monday night versus a Saturday night, you're probably not going to need as many workers on Monday, right? Because less people go out to eat typically on a Monday night, right? So you really have to be savvy with your decision making if you're a business owner, right? You want to make sure that you're optimizing the number of employees that you have. Okay? So if we look at labor and output, the marginal product of labor is the change in output from hiring one more worker. So the absolute goal of companies, restaurants, businesses is to find that optimal number. Okay, so the change in output from hiring one more worker. Okay, and we'll look at some charts together and hopefully it'll make sense. But if you have increasing marginal returns, labor increases as the number of workers increase. This makes sense. If you go from 2 employees to 5 employees, you're going to be able to output a lot more. Okay? If you have diminishing marginal returns, that's the point at which labor decreases as the number of workers increase. Okay? So you might be hiring more and more employees at your sandwich shop, but you're not making as many sandwiches. So you have too many workers and not enough capital to be productive. And we'll go through an example. Okay, so you really need to look at your book for this, girls. This is a marginal product of labor chart. So you can see the yellow column is the number of workers. This is in a beanbag factory. The green column is the amount of beanbags produced per hour. And then the marginal product of labor is the last column, okay? So if you see at the first worker, okay, so worker number 1, sorry, I'm gonna get you girls dizzy. That worker is making 4 beanbags, right? So the marginal product of labor is 4. At the second worker, the output gets raised to 10, okay? So that total marginal product is 6. And I hope you can see you're just simply subtracting 10 minus 4 equals 6, okay? So adding more workers helps them specialize in the tasks of output, right? So as you're increasing the workers, perhaps you would have them specialize. One worker cuts the cloth. One worker stuffs the bag with beans. The third worker sews the bag, right? So as they specialize, you're going to increase marginal returns, okay? But on the next slide, we're gonna see eventually the marginal return, it goes from 4 to 6 to 7, but all of a sudden it starts to drop. Why? Okay? So when workers 4 through 7 are hired, the marginal product of labor is still positive. The fourth worker increases output by 6 bags, while the seventh increases output by 1 bag. See, so in the output column, 0, 4, 10, 17, 23, 28, 31. But look what happens after you get to worker 7, okay? What do you think might be happening that all of a sudden, even though you were going from a 7th worker to an 8th worker, you're not receiving more output? Okay? So, it goes back to what I mentioned before about specialization. Eventually, there's no specific or special job for a worker to do. So after the beanbag hires those first 3 workers, one to sew, one to stuff, one to cut the fabric, the benefits of specialization end. Okay, so at that point, adding more workers increases total output, but at a decreasing rate. Okay, so your output is increasing, but your marginal product of labor was decreasing. Okay, so that's known as diminishing marginal returns. Did you see that? I'm sorry, girls, I am going to make you dizzy. See how these numbers are going up? The output's going up, but eventually, starting at worker number 3, right? When you get to the 4th worker, the marginal product of labor starts to go down. That's because there's only 3 ways to specialize making those bean bags. And that is what's known as diminishing marginal return, okay? Only 1 worker can be on the sewing machine at that time, okay? And then if you look back at the chart in the green column, okay, at labor, or the number of workers goes from 7 to 8, you actually decrease your output by 1 bag, okay? You would think that doesn't make sense, but eventually that 8th worker, starts to be disruptive. That person they start to get in each other's way. There's only so much capital in the beanbag factory. Like I said, there's only so many scissors, there's sewing machines. So it starts to get messy, and you'll eventually start to decrease your output numbers as well. All right. So before we move on to this, I just want you girls hopefully to understand, I'm not going to ask you to actually calculate the numbers, but I want you to be able to look at that chart and explain it, okay? And really the whole point of this exercise is to show you that businesses have to make these decisions all the time. So you don't want to hire that 8th worker at the beanbag factory, right? Because eventually that worker isn't being productive for you. So you want to make sure you know exactly how many employees you need at a given time. Okay? Other things that a business owner has to take into consideration, obviously they're always weighing costs with expenses. At the end of the day, they want to make sure that they're bringing in more money than they're spending. So a fixed cost is a cost that doesn't change, okay? So it's fixed every week, every month, etc. So rent. You pay $1,000 to rent that beanbag factory every month. It stays the same. You pay $1,000 in January, $1,000 in February, March, etc. Okay? A variable cost is something that could rise or fall depending on the quantity produced. So your electricity bill, right? That could be much higher in the summer. You're running all your air conditioners, okay? Your heating bill, obviously much higher in the winter. Your heating bill is non-existent in the summer months, right? So they vary, right? So that's a variable cost. Workers too, say you're a seasonal company, you hire more workers around the holidays, then you let them go in January, February, right? So that also, your payroll could be a variable cost. Okay, so if you're trying to find the total cost of your business, obviously you have to add both of those up. Again, I'm not trying to get into the minutia of all these formulas. So it's just simply the sum of the fixed costs plus variable costs. And then the marginal cost is the cost of producing 1 more unit of a good. So how much does it cost me to produce that 1 extra beanbag? Okay. And again, behind all hiring decisions is that firm's basic goal to maximize profits. So again, this is a very detailed chart of production costs that has to do with the bean bags. And I apologize, girls. I'm so sorry. It's very hard to explain over, with these small diagrams. But look in your book. Make sure you're reading this in your textbook. And ultimately, you want to make sure as a business owner that you find that level of output with the highest profit, okay? And in order to do that, you're gonna look for the biggest gap between the total revenue and the total cost. So in this example, this occurs when the firm makes 9 or 10 beanbags an hour. And again, I apologize, it's very, it's difficult to see, but just make sure you're reading this over in the section of the textbook, and that you obviously always want to be making sure that you are, again, making a profit. Okay? So another way to find the best level of output is to find the output level where marginal revenue is equal to marginal costs. Okay? And then lastly, this is the last slide. Obviously not all businesses are successful. Some business owners have to make that hard decision. When do you shut down your business? Okay? So there's so many things that come into play here. And if you were a business owner, this isn't something that's made just solely on, this slide in your economics class. I mean, there's other factors that go into it. But, very simply, if your revenue, so you're making money from the goods you produce, is greater than the cost of keeping it open, you stay in business. Okay? If you're operating at a loss, that's when you have to make that tough decision, to close.